As the final days of a year fade into memory, a quiet question rises in the heart of every reflective person. How can the next year be better than the one that has passed? How does one reshape the direction of a life that has become entangled in routine, noise, confusion, or fatigue? And is it possible, with clarity and sincerity, to make the coming year not merely different, but the best year one has ever lived? Human beings possess a strange and beautiful dual nature. On one hand, we constantly seek renewal. We desire improvement, wisdom, strength, and inner harmony. We dream of a life with more meaning and less distraction, more purpose and less chaos. Every new year becomes a symbolic doorway to this longing, a threshold through which we hope to step with greater self-mastery. Yet on the other hand, we are creatures of habit. We carry into every new beginning the same patterns of thought, the same emotional burdens, the same unresolved conflicts, and the same tendencies that have shaped our past. The calendar may change, but the inner world often remains unmoved. And so a person can easily arrive at the threshold of a new year carrying the full weight of their old self. This is the dilemma. The desire for renewal meets the resistance of the self. The longing for transformation collides with the inertia of habit. And the question, subtle and powerful, remains: how does one cross this divide? The truth is that most people approach the new year as though change were an external matter. They imagine that altering circumstances, acquiring new objects, or shifting environments will automatically elevate their lives. They seek improvement through sheer willpower or emotional excitement. But excitement fades, and willpower without structure dissolves. Without inner clarity, outer adjustments rarely endure. The ancient sages understood this dilemma long before modern psychology gave it new vocabulary. They recognized that human beings live divided between their highest aspirations and their immediate impulses. They perceived how easily the mind becomes confused, how emotions become overgrown, how desires become misguided, and how the light of reason becomes clouded by fear, anger, or disappointment. And among these sages, few articulated this inner struggle with the depth, rationality, and spiritual precision of Maimônides. Maimônides saw the human being not as a passive recipient of fate, but as a dynamic and evolving soul. He believed that every person carries within themselves the capacity for profound transformation. But he also understood that transformation is not a matter of wishful thinking. It is not a burst of enthusiasm. It is not an emotional aspiration held for a few days in January. Transformation comes from knowledge, discipline, clarity, and the cultivation of the intellect and character. For Maimônides, the greatest challenge in life is not changing the world around you, but aligning the world within you. The real struggle is to bring your thoughts, emotions, desires, and actions into harmony with truth. And the greatest victory is not over external obstacles, but over ignorance, confusion, and imbalance. What makes his approach so powerful for someone seeking to make the next year the best year of their life is precisely this. He teaches that renewal begins with understanding. He calls upon the seeker to examine themselves with honesty, to understand their motivations, to recognize their habits, and to see with clarity where they stand in relation to truth. For only a person who knows where they are can meaningfully choose where they wish to go. In this light, the question becomes deeper. The new year is not merely a time for resolutions, but for introspection. It is a moment to stand face to face with one's inner life, to ask the difficult questions. Where am I lacking in discipline? Where am I governed by impulse rather than wisdom? Where do I seek comfort instead of growth? Where have I neglected my mind, my character, or my spiritual purpose? Maimônides would say that this inquiry is not meant to lead to guilt or discouragement, but to clarity. For clarity is the first step toward freedom, and freedom is the foundation of an elevated life. The human dilemma, then, is not simply the friction between desire and habit. It is the deeper conflict between a life driven by external pressures and a life shaped by internal purpose, between a year dictated by circumstances and a year guided by wisdom, between reacting and choosing, between drifting and directing. To make the next year the best year of your life, Maimônides invites you to reconsider what best really means. It does not refer to a year free of difficulty. It does not mean constant pleasure or constant success, for pleasure fades and success is fragile. Instead, a best year is one in which you live closer to your purpose, guided by clarity rather than confusion, by wisdom rather than impulse, by balance rather than excess. A best year is one in which your actions follow reason, your emotions follow understanding, and your life aligns with truth. It is a year in which the intellect is illuminated, the character is strengthened, and the soul rises toward its higher nature. But to step into such a year, you must first confront the tension within yourself. You must acknowledge that the forces preventing your growth are not external, but internal. The habits you repeat, the distractions you allow, the beliefs you hold without examination, and the emotional storms you do not manage. Maimônides does not promise ease. He promises clarity. He does not promise shortcuts. He offers wisdom. And he does not promise instant transformation. He describes a path, steady and reliable, upon which anyone can walk. The new year becomes meaningful only when the seeker enters it with understanding, humility, and the willingness to engage in the labor of the soul. And this labor begins with recognizing the human dilemma that lies at the heart of change, the struggle between the higher self and the lower impulses, between reason and chaos, between truth and illusion. Yet within this struggle lies the doorway to the best year of your life. For once you understand the conflict, you can rise above it. Once you see the patterns, you can revise them. Once you acknowledge the inner landscape, you can cultivate it. And this, Maimônides teaches, is the beginning of wisdom. To understand how the next year can become the best year of one's life, we must enter the thought world of Maimônides with sincerity and depth. For Maimônides does not offer motivational promises or poetic optimism. He offers a system, a rational, ethical, and spiritual architecture designed to elevate the human being from confusion to clarity, from passivity to purpose, from wandering to wisdom. His teachings, spread across the Guide for the Perplexed, the Mishneh Torah, and the 8 chapters, converge on a single principle. A great life is not a product of chance, but of understanding. And the individual who seeks transformation must begin with the most essential faculty of their existence, their intellect. For Maimônides, the intellect is not merely a tool for thinking. It is the essence of the human being. It is the bridge between the finite self and ultimate truth. It is the medium through which a person perceives reality, aligns with divine wisdom, and cultivates virtue. Thus, any attempt at renewal that does not begin with the intellect will fail, because it will lack structure, purpose, and direction. In the 8 chapters, Maimônides explains that the human soul is divided into distinct faculties: the rational, the emotional, the appetitive, and the imaginative. These faculties are constantly in conversation or conflict within the individual. A person becomes balanced and whole only when the rational faculty governs the others. When reason guides emotion, when understanding channels desire, and when clarity directs imagination, the person becomes unified. If the coming year is to be better than the last, it must be the year in which the intellect regains its rightful place. It must be the year in which reason replaces impulse, in which wisdom replaces confusion, and in which clarity replaces distraction. For Maimônides, this is not simply a psychological preference, but an ethical imperative. He writes in the Mishneh Torah that the righteous person is one whose actions follow the golden path, the middle way between extremes. This golden mean is not an arithmetic midpoint, but a state of balance achieved through disciplined reflection. The individual who disciplines their emotions, who moderates their desires, and who tempers their behaviors becomes a vessel for wisdom. And through this balance, the intellect shines without obstruction. Yet, Maimônides is not naive. He knows that human beings do not naturally live in balance. We are drawn to extremes, to anger or apathy, to indulgence or deprivation, to pride or self-neglect. These extremes become the gravitational pull of the unexamined soul. And so, he teaches that the first responsibility of the seeker is to recognize their habitual excesses. Where does one lean too strongly? Where does one act without reason? Where has one abandoned the middle path? To make the next year the best year of your life, Maimônides would say that you must examine your tendencies with precision. You must identify the forces that pull you away from balance, for those are the forces that keep you from clarity. Only a balanced soul can receive wisdom, just as only a clear vessel can hold pure water. But balance alone is not enough. Maimônides insists that the human being must seek knowledge, not mere information but understanding, the knowledge of reality, of moral truth, of God, and of the self. In the Guide for the Perplexed, he explains that the highest human perfection is intellectual, not because intellect serves personal ambition, but because it liberates the individual from illusion and reveals the divine order within creation. He does not claim that one must understand everything. That is beyond human ability. But he teaches that the more a person aligns their mind with reality, the more they align their soul with truth. And a life aligned with truth is a life elevated beyond circumstance. It becomes resilient, purposeful, and illuminated from within. For Maimônides, intellectual perfection is inseparable from ethical perfection. Knowledge without virtue becomes dangerous. Virtue without knowledge becomes unstable. And so he teaches that the seeker must cultivate both simultaneously. Every step toward understanding must be accompanied by a step toward moral refinement. This means that the best year of your life cannot be built solely on new goals or aspirations. It must be built on a foundation of ethical discipline. Maimônides instructs the individual to refine their speech, to restrain anger, to show kindness, to act with integrity, to avoid arrogance, and to pursue justice. For each act of virtue strengthens the soul, and each act of clarity strengthens the mind. And yet, even this is not the highest teaching. In the third section of the Guide for the Perplexed, Maimônides describes a profound truth. The perfected individual does not merely think correctly or act ethically. They live in awareness of the divine presence that permeates all existence. They see that the universe is not a chaotic accident, but a structured expression of infinite wisdom. They understand that the human intellect, in glimpsing this order, participates in something eternal. Such a person becomes calm, disciplined, humble, and inwardly free. They do not fear the future because they live in truth. They do not cling to illusions because they have replaced ignorance with understanding. They do not wander aimlessly because their life flows toward the highest good. This is where Maimônides' philosophy becomes practical for the seeker of a better year. He teaches that the quality of your year does not depend on external events. It depends on the degree to which your intellect governs your inner life. A year is elevated not by circumstance, but by clarity, not by fortune, but by wisdom, not by novelty, but by understanding. And this understanding is cultivated through disciplined reflection, consistent learning, moral refinement, and the pursuit of truth. Maimônides would look at the modern person, overwhelmed by noise and distraction, and say gently, "If you wish to elevate the coming year, quiet your impulses and awaken your intellect. Strengthen your character, seek knowledge, moderate your emotions, pursue balance, and align your life with truth, for truth is the foundation upon which the soul can rise." Thus, Making the next year the best year of your life is not a matter of chance or optimism. It's a matter of aligning your existence with the timeless principles that govern human flourishing. And no one articulated these principles with greater clarity than Maimônides. In the teachings of Maimônides, the human being is never reduced to a mere intellect, nor exalted solely as a spiritual creature. He sees the human soul as a unity of faculties, a harmony of rational, emotional, and ethical dimensions, all of which must be refined if the individual wishes to rise toward truth. The spiritual journey is therefore not an escape from the world, but an elevation within it, and the next year of one's life becomes the best, not because external events submit to desire, but because the soul becomes aligned with wisdom. To understand this synthesis, we must begin with Maimônides' central principle, the unity of truth. For him, the truths discovered by reason and the truths revealed through divine wisdom cannot contradict each other, for truth is one. The universe does not present two competing realities, one spiritual and one rational, but a single reality that can be approached through different paths. When the intellect discerns the order of creation, it approaches the same wisdom that revelation transmits through sacred language. In this unity of truth, Maimônides sees the purpose of the human being. We are created with the capacity to perceive, to reflect, to discern, and to understand. This capacity is not merely an evolutionary advantage, it is the bridge between the human and the divine. The more a person knows, the more their soul participates in the eternal, and the more their understanding aligns with truth, the more their life becomes an expression of order, clarity, and harmony. But understanding alone is insufficient. Knowledge must transform the inner life. It must purify the emotions, refine the desires, and calm the anxieties that cloud perception. Maimônides writes in the 8 chapters that the healthy soul is one in which the emotional faculties obey reason, not out of repression, but out of harmony. Just as a musician tunes each string to achieve a single melody, the human being must tune each desire to the truth. When the desires are unrestrained, the intellect is weakened. When the emotions dominate, clarity dissolves. But when the intellect is illuminated, the emotions become allies, not adversaries. They support purpose rather than oppose it. They become the energy that carries understanding into action. This is the essence of Maimônides' spiritual synthesis, the integration of wisdom with character, of understanding with virtue, of intellect with devotion. In the Guide for the Perplexed, Maimônides describes the highest form of worship as intellectual love. This is not emotional fervor or ritual enthusiasm. It is the love that arises when the intellect contemplates the order of creation and recognizes the wisdom behind it. This contemplation awakens reverence, humility, and awe, not as emotions imposed from outside, but as natural responses to truth. Such love transforms the soul. It elevates the individual above anxiety, fear, and pettiness. It anchors the spirit in a reality that does not change with circumstance. It produces a kind of serenity that external events cannot disrupt. This is why, for Maimônides, the person who lives in truth becomes untroubled by the uncertainties of life. Their peace is not emotional, but philosophical. It is born from clarity. But this clarity demands discipline. Maimônides insists that the path to intellectual love requires moral refinement. A person cannot attain spiritual vision while living in ethical disorder. This is why he pairs the pursuit of wisdom with the cultivation of virtues: humility, patience, generosity, integrity, and moderation. Each virtue strengthens the soul's capacity to receive truth. Humility opens the mind to learning. Patience guards it against impulsive action. Generosity frees it from selfishness. Integrity aligns it with reality. Moderation protects it from excess. Through these virtues, the intellect becomes clear and the soul becomes receptive. The spiritual synthesis of Maimônides thus reveals a profound truth. The best year of your life is not a mystical experience or an emotional uplift. It is the year in which your soul becomes ordered. It is the year in which your intellect perceives more clearly, your emotions obey more faithfully, your desires are more balanced, and your actions reflect greater wisdom. This synthesis also gives new meaning to the concept of divine presence. For Maimônides does not describe God as a being that moves closer or further away from the human being. Instead, he teaches that closeness to God is the result of intellectual activity, and distance from God is the result of ignorance. The more a person understands, the closer they draw to divine wisdom. The less they understand, the farther they drift into confusion. Thus, the spiritual journey is not a movement in space, but a movement in consciousness. It is the ascent of the mind and the refinement of the soul. Each insight brings one nearer to the divine. Each act of wisdom expands the horizon of the spirit. This is why Maimônides insists that true spirituality cannot depend on emotion alone. Emotion fluctuates, it rises and falls with circumstance, but understanding endures. It stabilizes the soul, and this stability allows the individual to face the new year not with fragile optimism, but with grounded strength. In this synthesis lies a quiet promise. The more one aligns with truth, the more life becomes illuminated. Once the intellect perceives clearly, the illusions that caused suffering lose their power. Once the emotions are guided by reason, the storms within the heart begin to settle. Once the desires are disciplined, the individual becomes free. Freedom, for Maimônides, is not the absence of restraint, but the mastery of the self. It is the ability to act according to wisdom rather than impulse. And a year lived in freedom is a year lived in dignity. The spiritual synthesis therefore prepares the seeker for transformation. It reveals that a great year is not one in which the world changes, but one in which the self becomes capable of meeting the world with wisdom. It is a year in which the mind ascends, the soul stabilizes, and the character strengthens. Such a year becomes the best, not because it is easy, but because it is meaningful. Through this synthesis, Maimônides offers a vision of what human life can become when intellect and spirit unite. A life of clarity, balance, understanding, and inward elevation. A life in which each day deepens the connection between the finite human being and the infinite source of truth. This is the doorway through which one must pass if the next year is to be the best year of life. It is not a doorway opened by emotion or circumstance, but by wisdom. The question now becomes clear and urgent. How does one take the teachings of Maimônides and translate them into a year of genuine transformation? How does the philosophical become practical, the spiritual become habitual, and the intellectual become embodied in daily life? For Maimônides, wisdom that remains in the mind alone is incomplete. Knowledge must flow into action, and action must refine the soul. To make the next year the best year of your life, you must not rely on inspiration alone. Inspiration is a spark, but discipline is the fire that sustains illumination. And so the first practical teaching of Maimônides is the cultivation of conscious intention. He writes that every action, even the most mundane, should be guided by a clear purpose. Eating, working, resting, speaking, and even moments of leisure must serve the higher goal of strengthening the body, refining the character, and preparing the intellect for greater understanding. This is not asceticism, it is direction. It is the knowledge that the quality of one's life is shaped not by isolated dramatic moments, but by the small decisions that accumulate day after day. To live with conscious intention is to reject drift. It is to stop moving through life in a state of passive habit. Maimônides insists that the seeker must ask persistently, why am I doing this? Does this strengthen my soul? Does this weaken my character? Does this move me closer to truth or further from it? If you commit to this single practice, the next year will already stand apart from all the years before it. The second practical teaching is the discipline of moderation. Maimônides warns that human suffering often arises from excess desire, excess emotion, excess indulgence, excess fear. He writes in the Mishneh Torah that the healthiest soul is the one that walks the middle path, avoiding both extremes and cultivating balance. To apply this teaching, examine your tendencies. Do you speak too quickly or remain silent when you should speak? Do you eat without restraint or restrict yourself excessively? Are you too trusting or too suspicious? Too ambitious or too passive? Too harsh with yourself or too lenient? Each person must identify their own imbalances, for transformation begins with recognition. Then move gradually toward the golden mean. If you tend toward anger, practice calmness. If you tend toward fear, practice courage. If you lean toward indulgence, practice restraint. If you incline toward neglect, practice discipline. A year spent cultivating moderation becomes a year in which the soul is restored to equilibrium, and a balanced soul becomes a vessel for clarity. The third practical teaching concerns the refinement of speech. Maimônides returns to this theme repeatedly, for speech is the expression of the intellect and the mirror of the heart. The person who guards their words guards their soul. The person who speaks only with purpose strengthens their inner life. Apply this teaching by observing silence before speaking. Ask whether your words are necessary, truthful, kind, and aligned with wisdom. Avoid gossip, harsh criticism, impulsive statements, and thoughtless expressions. The discipline of speech purifies thought. It slows the mind, clarifies intention, and reduces emotional turmoil. The fourth teaching is the cultivation of study. Maimônides insists that the intellect must be nourished constantly. Just as the body weakens without proper nourishment, the mind weakens without study. Study for him is not merely academic, it is the practice through which the human being rises toward truth. Commit to daily learning. Read works that challenge your intellect, expand your understanding, and deepen your insight. Study philosophy, ethics, science, or sacred texts, not for information alone, but for reflection. Maimônides believed that an hour of sincere study can change the direction of an entire life. Knowledge illuminates the path. Ignorance darkens it. The best year of your life must be a year of learning. The fifth teaching concerns the discipline of emotional refinement. Maimônides does not teach the suppression of emotion, but the guidance of emotion. He recognizes that feelings are natural, but insists that they must be trained to follow reason. Anger, fear, jealousy, and pride must be moderated. Compassion, patience, diligence, and humility must be strengthened. Practical emotional refinement begins with self-observation. Notice your emotional reactions. Identify what triggers anger, fear, or envy. Then practice responding with thought instead of impulse. Slow your breath. Reflect before reacting. Strengthen the emotions that align with wisdom and weaken the ones that distort perception. Over time, the emotional life becomes peaceful, stable, and supportive of intellectual clarity. The sixth teaching is the care of the body. Maimônides, a physician, writes extensively about health, emphasizing that the body is the instrument through which the intellect engages the world. Neglecting the body harms the mind. He insists on balanced nutrition, moderate exercise, adequate rest, and avoidance of harmful habits. A year of physical discipline becomes a year of mental clarity. The seventh teaching concerns the formation of virtuous habits. Virtue is not achieved through isolated heroic acts, but through repeated small actions that shape the character. Choose one virtue, patience, generosity, humility, diligence, and practice it daily. Repeat it until it becomes natural, then choose another. Over time, the character becomes strong, stable, and aligned with wisdom. The eighth teaching is the pursuit of truth. Maimônides warns that a person must not deceive themselves, for self-deception is the root of spiritual sickness. Seek honesty in all matters, intellectual, emotional, ethical. Do not cling to illusions. Do not justify faults. Do not distort reality to protect comfort. Truth, however difficult, liberates. A year built upon truth becomes a year of integrity. The ninth teaching concerns solitude. The modern world is filled with endless noise, distraction, and stimulation, all of which fragment the mind. Maimônides recommends periods of solitude for reflection, study, and self-examination. Create moments of quiet. Withdraw from distraction. In silence, the intellect awakens and the soul regains its center. The 10th teaching is the pursuit of purpose. Maimônides insists that every person is created with the capacity for greatness, not in the sense of fame or achievement, but in the sense of alignment with truth. Ask yourself, what is my purpose? What is my contribution to the world? What unique capacities must I develop? A year lived with purpose becomes a year of direction. Finally, Maimônides teaches the seeker to cultivate gratitude, humility, and reverence. Gratitude opens the heart to the blessings of life. Humility frees the soul from arrogance. Reverence connects the individual to the divine order of creation. These virtues elevate the spirit and anchor the individual in a reality larger than themselves. If you carry these teachings into the next year, it will not be the best year by accident. It will be the best year because you shaped it through wisdom. Because you disciplined the mind, refined the character, balanced the emotions, strengthened the body, and aligned your life with truth. And as Maimônides teaches, the individual who walks the path of wisdom does not merely change their year, they change their entire way of being. Such a person becomes calm in the face of uncertainty, steady in the face of challenge, disciplined in the face of desire, and faithful in the pursuit of truth. Their life becomes a reflection of divine order. Their days become meaningful. Their soul becomes illuminated. This is how one makes the next year the best year of life. Not through chance, not through hope alone, but through the deliberate cultivation of wisdom, virtue, clarity, and truth. Through the teachings of Maimônides, the new year becomes not a promise from time, but a promise from the self, a commitment to live with intention, understanding, and elevation. And in this commitment, the soul rises.